Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the sun rises over the endless sands of the Nile, painting the desert in soft golds and pale pinks. You trudge barefoot across warm, gritty soil, inhaling the scent of fresh bread baking in clay ovens and the faint tang of papyrus along the riverbanks. You probably won't survive this if you're imagining yourself as a pharaoh, since your survival skills at navigating mud, sandals, and unpredictable crocodile sightings are questionable at best. Yet here you are, ready to immerse yourself in the rhythm of daily life in an ancient Egyptian village, where each movement, each sound, and each whisper of wind has a story to tell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share in the comments your location and local time, so we can drift through history together in real time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins quietly, with the first light stretching over the horizon. You can feel the warmth creep over your skin as villagers emerge from mud brick homes, shaking out mats, tending small hearths, and carrying pitchers of water drawn from the Nile's gentle current. Chickens cluck nervously, and a donkey brays somewhere off in the distance, reminding you that this world is alive in subtle ways. Women kneel by shallow basins, washing clothes, occasionally pausing to adjust the folds of their linen tunics. Men gather ropes, baskets, and simple tools, preparing to head to the fields or the workshops, their movements economical yet deliberate, honed by years of routine. Even children have assigned tasks, chasing stray geese, stacking reeds, or fetching water from communal wells, learning the ways of village life before they even notice it. You step lightly along the sandy path, careful not to disturb the rhythm, feeling the granular warmth of earth beneath your feet, and noticing the tiny details, a stray cat winding around sandals, the glint of sunlight on polished bronze amulets, the faint smell of baking bread mingling with river reeds. Historians still argue whether village artisans had formal apprenticeships or simply learned through observation and imitation, but as you watch, the process seems intuitive, almost meditative. The village's social rhythm unfolds naturally. Elderly men sit in the shade of date palms, leaning on staffs, exchanging quiet conversation, while younger men head to work in the fields or along the riverbank. You catch glimpses of water jars glinting in the morning light, reeds being bundled for roofing, and baskets carefully loaded with vegetables or fish. Even in this ordinary flow, there are quirks. A cat swipes a fish, a child darts to chase a bird, and a dog barks at its own shadow. The simple unpredictability of daily life punctuates the meditative rhythm, reminding you that even in a structured society, chaos sneaks in and adds texture. Food preparation is another sensory layer. You notice women grinding grain with stone mortars, the gritty powder filling the air with a slightly nutty scent. Water is drawn from shallow pools, stirred to clarity and poured into clay jars for storage. Bread loaves are scored with simple patterns, crosses, lines, or small sun motifs, and then set to bake in open hearths. There's a quiet humor in watching the baker pat a particularly stubborn dough into submission, grumbling under his breath in a way that seems oddly relatable across millennia. Scholars debate whether these early breads were daily staples or reserved for ceremonial purposes, but the smell tells you they are central to life here, bridging sustenance and ritual. You begin to sense the connection between the natural environment and human activity. The sun is climbing steadily, casting long shadows that stretch across sand and stone. You notice the birds on the rooftops, the flicker of light through palm fronds, and the occasional splash of water as fish jump in the Nile. These moments are not just background, they define the day's rhythm. You imagine villagers tracking the sun's position unconsciously, orienting their movements to shadow and light, measuring time without clocks, and it feels both intimate and vast. You remember, almost fondly, that later in the day, priests will interpret the shadows with solemnity, reading messages from Ra himself. Even chores become meditative. Children carry water with a sense of ceremony, the splashing rhythm marking seconds in their playful calculus. Adults sweep the courtyards, their brooms tracing slow arcs across sun-warmed floors. You can hear the soft scratching of reeds against mud, the distant murmur of conversation, and the occasional bray or cluck. There's humor here if you choose to see it. A chicken suddenly dashes through a line of neatly stacked baskets, or a boy trips over a reed bundle, laughter spilling into the air. Life in the village is structured, yes, but it's never dull, and you can feel the pulse of humanity in these gentle, small disruptions. Historians still argue whether daily life was primarily dictated by environmental necessity or social hierarchy, but standing here, you can sense the intertwined layers. Villagers navigate not just physical spaces, but social rituals, inherited knowledge, and unspoken etiquette. Every interaction, from greeting a neighbor to tending a hearth, carries meaning beyond mere survival. You can almost feel the subtle choreography, hands moving deftly, voices softening in reverence near sacred spaces, and a collective attentiveness to rhythm and routine. You notice the smallest details, like the careful stacking of reeds for shade or the precise pouring of water into clay jars, and recognize them as threads in a complex, quiet tapestry of life. By early morning, the sun has warmed the village thoroughly, and the hum of activity reaches a gentle crescendo. The baker's loaves are golden, the river shimmers under sunlight, and the smell of bread, herbs, and river reeds mixes into a calm yet vivid sensory landscape. You take a deep breath, noticing how the warm air carries both dust and sweetness, the smell grounding you in this moment. As you walk along narrow alleys observing villagers at work, you begin to feel part of the rhythm, like an unnoticed chord in a living melody. Quirky moments continue to surface. A child balances precariously on a low wall, a dog steals a loaf and is promptly chased, and you chuckle softly at these small, timeless dramas. Your imagination begins filling gaps in the narrative. You picture the sounds that cannot be captured, whispers of prayers, distant drums signaling market time, and the subtle creak of boats tethered along the riverbank. Each sound, each movement becomes a layer of immersion, and you notice how the village's gentle chaos is ordered by centuries of habit and custom. Observing a woman grind grain with rhythmic precision, you imagine how that small motion has repeated for generations, creating continuity and comfort in an ever-changing natural world. Scholars debate whether rituals were practical or symbolic, but watching them in real time, you feel both. By late morning, shadows grow shorter, and the day begins hinting at midday rest. Villagers pause, gathering under palm fronds or in shaded courtyards, exchanging brief conversations. You notice a quiet, almost sleepy energy settling over the scene. The river laps lazily, a soft undertone to the meditative sounds of daily life. Even the sun seems to move slower, casting gentle warmth without harshness. You imagine villagers tracking the sun's position unconsciously, orienting their movements to shadow and light, measuring time without clocks, and it feels both intimate and vast.
You follow the baker from the village square to a quieter courtyard, where he keeps a small collection of tools, each one worn and polished by years of use. You notice the slender shadow stick resting at a precise angle against a low wall, its tip pointing toward a faint line etched into the stone. It's simple, almost comically minimalist, a stick and a mark, but it's enough. Ancient Egyptians used such devices to track the sun's movement, marking time not in minutes, but in gradually shifting shadows. As you lean closer, the fine grooves scratched into the stone catch the light, and you imagine generations of villagers squinting at them, adjusting their daily chores according to these tiny, dependable cues. Historians still argue whether these instruments were accurate enough to schedule complex tasks, or if their main purpose was ritualistic, reinforcing the sacred connection between sunlight and human activity. You pick up a small mercat, a wooden sighting tool, and hold it up as if aligning the stars above. The tool feels surprisingly heavy considering its simplicity, and you wonder at the patience required to use it properly. Priests reportedly used mercats in pairs, sighting along the night sky to determine hours, dates, or even the best time to plant crops. There's a quirky detail here. Some mercats were cleverly disguised as decorative objects for the wealthy, like small staves with inlaid ivory or ebony, suggesting that practicality and prestige often walked hand in hand. You traced your fingers along the polished wood, imagining a young apprentice learning to read the heavens while avoiding the occasional distraction of a particularly persistent cat in the courtyard. By mid-morning, shadows are already stretching, and the stick in the courtyard is showing its first long line. You crouch beside it, noticing the subtle curve cast across the sand, a delicate dance between geometry and sunlight. It's fascinating how a simple stick can divide the day, a reminder that the Egyptians' understanding of time was observational rather than abstract. You remember reading that they divided daytime into 12 hours, but the actual length of an hour varied with the season. Some hours felt long in winter and short in summer, which seems oddly flexible compared to our rigid clocks, but it makes sense when you think of life guided by nature rather than numbers. Historians still debate the methods used to ensure consistency across different regions, but here in this quiet courtyard, it seems almost irrelevant. You wander to another corner, where a group of scribes hunch over papyrus, marking diagrams and notes. They observe the shadow's movement and record tiny increments, combining practical necessity with meticulous artistry. One scribe glances up at you as if to say, "Don't touch my work, it's magic," which feels surprisingly relatable. There's a fringe theory that some mercats doubled as teaching tools, letting apprentices grasp both geometry and astronomy in one gentle lesson. Watching them, you imagine tracing invisible lines with your finger across the sunlit courtyard, a slow-motion game connecting earth and sky. The air carries the faint aroma of reed ink and dust, mingling into a smell that is both grounding and slightly mysterious.
The afternoon sun has mellowed, and you stroll toward a temple whose limestone walls glow softly in the warm light. You notice how the sun casts elongated shadows across the facade, turning engraved hieroglyphs into playful silhouettes. Walking along the path, you can almost hear the faint rustle of linen robes and sandals against stone, and the distant murmur of chanting as priests move in measured patterns. The sunlight itself seems to carry significance here, more than just illumination. It is an actor, a guide, and a spiritual marker. Egyptians believed that Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky each day, bringing life and order, and you feel that narrative subtly shaping every movement in the courtyard. Historians still argue whether shadow worship was more symbolic than functional, but as you linger, it's hard to separate the two. You pause to watch the shadow of a tall obelisk stretch across the temple floor. It's elegant, almost teasing in its simplicity, yet it serves as a precise instrument for tracking hours, ceremonial timings, or even seasonal festivals. You notice a quirk. One particularly small shadow mark seems to wobble slightly at midday, leading villagers to tell humorous stories about Ra momentarily napping and the sun misbehaving. You smile, imagining a priest nudging a colleague and whispering, "See, even the gods need a break." The balance of precision and playfulness is subtle, yet it suffuses every stone, carving, and gesture around you.
As you wander deeper into the temple, you catch sight of priests manipulating sundials, merkets, and shadow sticks. Each device is carefully calibrated, sometimes in pairs, sometimes standing alone. You notice the tactile nature of the work, wood and stone polished smooth, inked lines and tiny carvings marking minutes and hours, and a faint dusting of sand from the courtyard. Fringe studies suggest that some shadow sticks doubled as astrological teaching tools, letting young apprentices connect celestial patterns to earthly life in a single, contemplative exercise. Watching them, you feel an almost meditative calm, as if time itself were slowing to match the movement of shadow across stone. The gardens beckon, their tranquility a soft counterpoint to the structured measurement of time. Lotus blooms hover above shallow pools, their petals opening and closing with a delicate rhythm. You inhale the sweet, watery scent, noticing how each plant casts tiny, dappled shadows that shift as the sun moves. Some scholars argue that garden placement mirrored cosmic principles, arranging flora in ways that reflected celestial balance. Others suggest the designs were purely aesthetic, a space for leisure and contemplation. Either way, walking among these quiet pools, the gentle sound of water lapping its stone edges, you feel a profound link between observation, beauty, and spiritual reflection. You notice the priests performing their rituals, hands raised to trace the sun's arc, lips moving in soft incantations. Occasionally, one glances at a shadow stick, adjusting its angle minutely, as though checking the alignment of heaven and earth. The curious part is that some rituals incorporated tiny whimsical elements, painted cats, miniature obelisks, or feathered charms meant to correct the sun's course if Ra felt mischievous. It's both earnest and playful, reflecting a culture where humor, observation, and reverence coexisted in subtle harmony. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of lotus and warmed limestone settle into your senses. You wander to a shaded colonnade where carved reliefs illustrate gods interacting with mortals. Shadows from columns ripple across the walls, creating a soft, animated effect as the sun drifts lower. You notice a small, curious carving of a sunboat, its tiny crew, both human and divine, casting micro-shadows on the stone, reminding you that light, art, and function often intersected seamlessly. Historians still debate the symbolic meaning of these carvings. Were they instructive, devotional, or simply decorative? Observing them now in the shifting light, you feel the layers of intent intertwine effortlessly. The gentle lapping of the river nearby mingles with the muted sound of temple chants, and you notice the rhythmic movement of shadows over a mosaic floor. Each figure, each symbol, shifts as the sun moves, creating a slow-motion dance of light and geometry. Fringe interpretations suggest these shifting shadows were used to determine auspicious times for specific rituals, while others argue it was a byproduct of architectural aesthetics. Either way, you feel yourself lulled by the pattern, a quiet, predictable motion that also allows for gentle surprise, like the way a feather drifts unpredictably on a soft breeze. A child of a priest appears, tracing a tiny shadow on the floor with a finger, giggling quietly as the elongated line wobbles and shifts. It's an endearing reminder that observation is not solely scientific or spiritual. Sometimes it's playful. The shadow stick, the merket, and the obelisk all have a dual nature, precise instruments for understanding time and cosmos, yet objects of curiosity and amusement, inviting engagement and gentle learning. You remember the earlier village courtyard, the baker's stick, the scribe's playful notes, and notice the same continuity here, a blend of function, humor, and subtle ritual. The late afternoon sun warms your shoulders as you wander into a small chamber lined with alabaster vessels, each designed to hold oils, perfumes, or sacred waters. Light filters through narrow slits in the walls, casting thin ribbons of shadow across the floor. You notice how priests occasionally align the vessels to catch sunlight in specific ways, enhancing fragrance or visual effect. Some scholars argue these arrangements were functional, aiding in measurements for rituals, while others suggested they were symbolic, creating a visual representation of divine order. You lean back, absorbing the layered interplay of light, scent, and geometry. As evening approaches, the shadows lengthen dramatically. The obelisk in the courtyard now projects a long, elegant line across stone and sand, guiding the final moments of temple activity. Priests perform closing rituals, subtly adjusting instruments to mark the transition from day to night. Fringe stories tell of mischievous spirits stretching shadows at dusk, adding a light-hearted dimension to otherwise solemn proceedings. You feel yourself smiling, imagining the playful negotiation between humans and unseen forces, order and whimsy. The temple is quieter now. The sun dips toward the horizon, bathing the courtyard in amber light. You notice small details, a lizard curling in a shadow's cool edge, the faint glint of ink lines etched into papyrus, the slow sway of lotus blossoms. Even the simplest shadows, the stick in the corner, the pillar's columns, tell stories of time, observation, and human attention to detail. Historians still argue whether daily shadow readings influenced broader architectural or ritual planning, but here the evidence is clear. Life and time are intimately intertwined. Nightfall edges closer, and you find yourself seated on a stone bench, watching the temple shadows fade and stretch, imagining the journey of Ra across the sky. You reflect on how shadow sticks, merkets, and sundials mediate human understanding of natural cycles, blending science, art, spirituality, and playful observation. A gentle breeze carries the scent of the river and blooming lotus, and you feel the slow, rhythmic cadence of life in this ancient place settle over you. Quirky anecdotes, sleeping cats, mischievous children, wobbly shadow lines soften the precision, making it all feel human and relatable. By the time the last golden rays fade, you are wrapped in the quiet majesty of the temple, the rhythm of shadow and sun, and the gentle humor woven through observation. Every stone, stick, and mark holds a story, subtle yet profound, reminding you that time in ancient Egypt was both measured and experienced, observed and played with. You breathe in slowly, letting the soft, ambient sounds, distant river, faint chants, fluttering leaves settle into your senses as the temple and its shadows linger in your imagination.
You step from the temple courtyard into a walled garden, and immediately the scents shift, sweeter now, softer, a mix of lotus, mint, and freshly tilled soil. Sunlight filters through tall papyrus stalks, casting flickering, almost playful shadows across the smooth stone paths. The garden seems alive in a quiet way. Bees hover above blooms, small birds hop between reeds, and the occasional frog croaks lazily near shallow pools. Walking slowly, you inhale deeply, noting the layered fragrances and imagining how the Egyptians themselves experienced these gardens not just as ornamental spaces, but as places for reflection, learning, and leisure. Historians still argue whether palace gardens were primarily spiritual spaces, practical food sources, or a combination of both, but for now, you can feel the intentional calm they inspired. The paths wind gently, lined with low hedges and flowering plants, many of which you recognize and many that seem entirely foreign. You stoop to touch a soft lotus petal, feeling its cool, delicate texture against your fingertips, and notice a curious hummingbird-sized insect hovering nearby, shimmering in sunlight. Some scholars suggest that specific plants were cultivated not just for aesthetic beauty, but for subtle medicinal properties, while others argue the arrangements were purely ceremonial, designed to mirror the order of the cosmos. You pause to admire a circular pool at the center, where lilies float serenely, reflecting golden sunlight like tiny mirrors, each ripple catching a fragment of sky. As you wander further, a gardener emerges, carrying a basket of fragrant oils, freshly harvested herbs, and tiny papyrus bundles. He hums softly as he arranges the plants, brushing the leaves with gentle hands, and you notice the meticulous care he gives even the smallest shoots. Fringe accounts suggest some of these gardens contained hidden compartments for rare or sacred herbs, known only to select priests or healers. You watch him sprinkle water over the papyrus roots, the droplets glinting in the sun, creating miniature rainbows that dance across stone edges. There's a subtle humor in imagining a tiny, invisible audience of gods observing each droplet's path, nodding in approval, or mild disappointment, depending on the day. You pause to sit on a low stone bench, feeling the sun warm your shoulders and noticing the gentle rustle of leaves. The garden paths are narrow, winding between pools and flower beds, and you find yourself following the patterns of sunlight and shadow across the ground. Some historians debate whether the layout of these gardens was inspired by symbolic representations of the Nile itself, with canals and pools mimicking the river's branching paths. Watching the movement of water and shadow, you can almost see the logic of this design, a natural choreography connecting life, leisure, and spiritual contemplation. A small fountain trickles quietly nearby, the water creating a soft rhythm against stone. You lean in, listening to its gentle melody, and notice a quirky detail. Tiny fish swim in precise patterns, occasionally nudging a floating petal. Some scholars suggest that specific fish were thought to bring good luck or act as tiny ceremonial participants, though scholars still argue whether their inclusion was functional or symbolic. You watch a dragonfly skim the surface, its wings catching the sunlight and reflecting fragments of garden magic in midair. The juxtaposition of playfulness and precision seems quintessentially Egyptian. Life observed, curated, and gently celebrated. Wandering past a line of fragrant herbs, you notice a small patch of blue flowers that you later learned were valued not for scent, but for medicinal application, used in oils or poultices for minor ailments. Some of these plants have peculiar histories, stories of ancient deities or legendary healers who recommended them for curious conditions, like calming restless children or aiding concentration during study. You smile at the thought, imagining a scribe carefully selecting petals to improve focus, while a mischievous cat swipes at the bundle, creating minor chaos. The interweaving of practical use, symbolic meaning, and gentle mischief seems to define this garden as much as the water or stone paths. Birds call softly in the distance as you meander along a shaded canal lined with reeds. Water trickles over tiny stone spouts, creating a hypnotic, almost ASMR-like rhythm that draws your attention to the present moment. You notice patterns in the sunlight, small beams filtering through papyrus stalks, casting dancing shadows on the smooth stones. Fringe theories suggest that these subtle light effects were intentionally designed to enhance meditation or ritual, though some historians argue that it was simply an aesthetic choice. You lean back, feeling the gentle hum of life in the garden, observing the way every sound, shadow, and scent contributes to a slow, calming sensory experience. A gardener adjusts a small trellis, guiding flowering vines to form gentle arches over pathways. You duck under one, feeling the soft brush of petals against your forehead, and notice the serene smile of the gardener, content with the precise arc of growth. Some fringe accounts mention that these arches were symbolic doorways, guiding both humans and spirits through sacred spaces, though there's debate over whether this belief was universal or localized to specific palaces. You feel yourself walking deliberately, following not just paths, but the subtle choreography of design, letting your pace sync with the garden's rhythm. You pause near a small stone basin, its surface covered with floating petals. The scent is faintly sweet and calming, and you realize that the Egyptians understood the psychological power of fragrance, using it in both leisure and ritual. You dip a finger in the water, feeling its coolness contrast with the warmth of stone under your hand, and watch the ripples carry petals in soft, spiraling patterns. Historians still argue whether scent was primarily ceremonial or simply a pleasant luxury, but the sensory experience is undeniable. You inhale deeply, letting your breath synchronize with the slow, hypnotic motion of water and petals. In the late afternoon, the garden shadows lengthen, creating pockets of shade that shift gradually across pools, paths, and flower beds. You notice a priest and an apprentice carefully noting sunlight patterns, using them to determine optimal planting spots for the next season. There's a subtle humor in imagining the apprentice's frustration when a mischievous frog interrupts measurement and splashes water onto carefully arranged reeds. Fringe theories suggest that some gardeners embedded symbolic markers in the garden's layout, invisible to the casual visitor, to teach lessons about time, order, or cosmic cycles. You find yourself observing both nature and human interaction in equal measure, the combination creating a gentle, almost hypnotic cadence. As the sun dips lower, golden light glints off the lotus pools, turning the water into a tapestry of amber and green. You notice small insects skimming the surface, casting delicate shadows that join the interplay of light and water. The air is filled with soft scents of herbs, mud, and flower petals, and you feel a quiet sense of completeness. Life observed, ordered, and celebrated in microcosm. Some historians debate whether the gardens were primarily for elite contemplation or community utility, but here the effect is universal, a slow, immersive journey through scent, sound, and sight. By evening, shadows from the towering papyrus stalks stretch across the ground, merging with fading sunlight to create a soft, warm glow. Birds settle among reeds, frogs croak a steady lullaby, and the gentle trickle of water completes a soothing symphony. You stroll along winding paths, mindful of each footfall on warm stone, each gentle breeze brushing against your skin, and the subtle movements of petals in the water. Quirky observations: the frog that leaps at the wrong moment, the dragonfly skimming too close, the slight wobble in a petal's shadow add life and gentle humor to the precise, orderly environment. Finally, you pause at the garden's exit, feeling the day's warmth and calm settle into your body. The interplay of sunlight, shadow, fragrance, and sound has created a slow, immersive meditation, a tactile, visual, and olfactory exploration that blends observation, ritual, and quiet amusement. You take one last deep breath, noticing the way every element, stick, shadow, petal, ripple, contributes to a subtle mastery of time, space, and life itself. The garden, like the village and temple before it, leaves you with a gentle, reflective sense of harmony and calm, a perfect segue into the next chapter of shadow, observation, and human ingenuity. Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into ancient Egypt, where the desert meets the green ribbon of the Nile. Picture the river at dawn, wide and calm, a mirror that catches the first streaks of pink light while ibis birds flap lazily above. The air is still cool, though you already sense the day will bring heat heavy enough to flatten you if you're not used to it. In fact, you probably wouldn't survive the first week here without some serious acclimation, and that's before the local mosquitoes even get a taste of you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching, go ahead and let me know your location and the local time down in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a reed mat, The smell of smoke from last night's small cooking fire still faint on your clothes. The clay walls of your mud brick house are warm to the touch even at sunrise, already storing up the heat of the day like a patient oven. Somewhere nearby, a rooster you don't own insists on becoming everyone's alarm clock. Chickens, by the way, were latecomers to Egypt, but in this imagined morning, one struts past anyway because historical timelines don't always match what you picture. And historians still argue whether domestic fowl were introduced here around the New Kingdom or much later. Stepping outside, you hear the village beginning to stir. The Nile gleams just beyond the fields, the lifeline of everything around you. Without the river's flood, the soil would be dust and stone. With it, the land transforms into ribbons of green so intense they look like they've been painted on by hand. Mainstream history tells us that the flooding was fairly predictable, enough that entire calendars were built around it. Farmers prayed for a good flood, not too shallow, not too high, like Goldilocks with water levels. As you trudge toward the riverbank, the ground feels soft under your feet, still damp from irrigation channels cut by hand. Water buffaloes stand in the shallows flicking their tails, looking unimpressed with human industry. Somewhere a boy is already singing to himself as he drives a small herd of goats toward a patch of grass. If you're squinting, the whole scene looks timeless, as though this morning could be happening 3,000 years ago, or yesterday. You lean down, scoop up a handful of Nile water and watch it drip back through your fingers. It's murkier than you expected. Even in antiquity, Egyptians worried about water quality. Papyrus scrolls mention boiling and straining methods, though whether they worked effectively is still debated. One quirky tidbit, some texts recommend using crushed barley seeds to purify water, which sounds suspiciously like an excuse to brew more beer, but maybe that was just multitasking. The sun pushes higher, lighting the tops of palm trees until they glow like fiery spears. You smell bread baking already, flat loaves slapped onto hot stones. Families work together, with women and girls kneading dough while small boys stoke fires. The aroma is rich, nutty, and almost sweet. You can't help but feel a pang of hunger, though you remember that breakfast comes later. First, there are morning chores, and no, nobody has invented coffee yet, so you'll have to get through this on sheer Nile-side determination. Your neighbor waves as he passes, carrying a basket of fish strung together like a wriggling necklace. Fishing was one of the earliest Nile traditions, though the methods varied: nets, hooks, even harpoons for bigger catches. Some scholars say certain fish species were taboo to eat depending on the region. Imagine refusing a perfectly good tilapia because the local temple frowned upon it. Historians still argue whether those taboos were strictly enforced or just loosely observed. A small child runs past you barefoot, giggling, and tosses a mud ball that misses your head by inches. You realize sandals would have been a good idea, but shoes were optional luxuries for most villagers. The ground is uneven but soft, warm already. You hear the bray of a donkey, see its long ears twitch, and realize just how central these animals were. Donkeys hauled water jars, carried crops, and stubbornly resisted orders, pretty much the same as they do today. As the day begins, you sense the rhythm of life falling into place. Chores, meals, prayers, gossip, and endless work tied to the land. It's not glamorous, not filled with golden treasures or dramatic hieroglyphic epics, but it's life as most Egyptians knew it. Simple, repetitive, sometimes backbreaking, and yet strangely soothing, because everything has its cycle, as reliable as the river itself. You take one last look at the shimmering Nile. It seems calm now, but you know its mood shift. Gentle floods, violent surges, and years of drought that could make entire villages vanish. For this moment, though, it's a mirror to the rising sun, whispering the start of another day that looks so ordinary and yet carries the weight of millennia in its ripples.
You shuffle back from the riverbank, stomach growling a little because it's finally time for breakfast. Now, don't expect scrambled eggs, pancakes, or a cinnamon latte here. Ancient Egyptian mornings are built on bread and beer. That's it. The so-called breakfast of champions. The bread is dense, coarse, and speckled with bits of chaff and grit that have sneaked in during the grinding of grain. The stones used to crush emmer wheat leave tiny fragments behind, so when you chew, it's a little like biting into a deliciously flavored sandpaper. Archaeologists studying mummies often find worn-down teeth, ground almost flat from decades of eating this crunchy delight.
On the bright side, you won't need to floss tonight. Next comes the beer. Forget the frothy, golden drink you picture from your local pub. Egyptian beer is more like a thick, sweet, porridge-ish liquid. Sometimes it's chunky enough that you'd almost need a spoon. But in a land with a blazing sun and limited clean water, this murky brew is safe, filling, and, most importantly, mildly intoxicating. Perfect for taking the edge off another day in the fields. Historians still argue whether it was nutritious enough to count as a meal on its own, or if that's just wishful thinking from ancient farmers who didn't want to cook more food. The process of brewing involves baking a batch of half-cooked bread, crumbling it into vats, mixing with water, and letting it all bubble into a tangy concoction. Some batches even have dates or honey added, making them sweeter. You take a sip, feel the faint fizz, and imagine villagers clinking clay mugs together, mumbling something like cheers, though they probably didn't use that exact word. It's a surprisingly communal moment. As you sit cross-legged with a group, tearing hunks of bread and dipping them in a smear of beans or onions, you notice how central food is to daily rituals. Sharing is survival. Without the collective storage of grain in silos, carefully counted and taxed, of course, famine would strike far more often. One mainstream fact you might not realize, bakers often work directly for temples or estates, their production tied to religious offerings as much as to family tables. And yet, quirks abound. Records mention workers being paid in bread and beer rations. Imagine doing a full day of stone hauling and getting handed 5 loaves and 2 jugs at the end. Forget direct deposits or checks. Your paycheck is literally dinner. Sometimes the beer allotment was so generous, you wonder how anyone got anything done. Maybe that explains the occasional wobbly hieroglyph line carved on a tomb wall. There's also the matter of onions. Yes, onions. Egyptians adored them, so much so that some were placed in tombs as offerings. You chew into one now, sharp and spicy, your eyes watering. Was this breakfast or self-inflicted punishment? Hard to tell. Historians still debate whether onions had religious symbolism, possibly tied to their layered shape, or whether they were just cheap, abundant, and good at keeping away mosquitoes, or friends, depending on your breath. Children run by, their faces sticky from date syrup, laughing with mouths full of crumbs. Someone nearby tries to sing a tune while tapping a little drum, though it's too early for most people's taste. A sleepy father mutters that the beer isn't strong enough, and everyone chuckles knowingly. Humor hasn't changed much in 4,000 years. You take another bite, crunching through grit again, and think about how this humble meal has powered empires, monuments, and endless cycles of life along the Nile. It's not glamorous, but it's deeply human. Each chew ties you to thousands of years of breakfasts, the kind no one writes epic poems about, yet the kind that truly sustains a civilization. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten, and your belly is finally full, though perhaps not comfortably so. Bread lodged in your teeth, a faint buzz from the beer, and the day stretches ahead. Time to stand, stretch, and wonder what scratchy outfit you're about to wear into this long, hot morning.
Your belly is full, your head is pleasantly fuzzy from that thick beer, and now comes the moment of deciding what to wear. Spoiler, it won't be complicated. Ancient Egyptian wardrobes are not exactly bursting with options. Still, you tug at a folded length of linen and prepare yourself for the scratchy embrace of history's most practical fabric. Linen, spun from flax plants, rules every closet. Cotton and silk are still centuries away from strutting your stuff here. The threads are pale, almost white, and when freshly woven, they gleam faintly in the sun. But don't get too romantic about it. Most people's tunics are coarse, stiff, and about as comfortable as wearing a bed sheet that's been washed with gravel. Richer folk might enjoy softer, finely pleated linen that ripples elegantly when they move, while you, humble villager, wrestle with a fabric that feels like it's exfoliating your skin with every step. The mainstream fact is that Egyptians wore linen not only because it kept them cool, but also because they believed wool was ritually unclean. Wool might keep you warm, but in this climate, it just wasn't worth the sweat. So you wrap the garment around you, tie it with a simple belt, and try not to scratch.
Historians still argue whether everyone pleated their clothes at home or if that delicate accordion style was reserved for the upper classes with servants who had the patience of saints. And here comes the fun part: accessories. You don't leave the house without a charm or two because protection from bad luck is always in fashion. Maybe you slip on an amulet in the shape of the Eye of Horus, a tiny phaon bead strung on cord, believed to ward off illness and envy. Or perhaps a scarab beetle, carved from green stone, because who doesn't want a good luck bug hanging around their neck? Some folks even carried little figures of Bes, the short, squat, grinning household god, who was basically the ancient Egyptian version of a protective garden gnome. Quirky, yes, but effective, or at least reassuring. Children are smeared with protective ointments too, sometimes thick layers of oil and resins that glisten in the sunlight. One neighbor pats a squirming toddler coated like a roast chicken, muttering blessings under her breath. You've heard odd remedies about mixing crocodile dung with oil to keep away both sunburn and evil spirits. Maybe it works, maybe it just makes you unpopular at parties. Historians still argue whether crocodile dung sunscreen was widely practiced or just an outlandish recipe noted in a single medical scroll. Either way, you make a mental note to stick to shade. You glance at your reflection in a pot of water. Linen tunic, slightly uneven, amulet hanging awkwardly, hair cropped short. Hairstyles, by the way, are a big deal. Men and women often shaved their heads to escape lice and heat, then wore wigs on special occasions. These wigs could be elaborate, braided with beads, or sometimes just practical and short. You run your hand across your own sweaty scalp and decide you're grateful no one expects you to maintain glossy wig hair while herding goats. Makeup is another layer of the morning ritual, though not just for glamour. You rub a little black coal under your eyes, and instantly you feel both fabulous and shielded from the glare of the sun. Scientists have found that the lead-based compounds in Egyptian cosmetics may have helped prevent eye infections too. So yes, your eyeliner is medicinal. Somewhere an ancient scribe is rolling his eyes at modern beauty influencers, muttering, "He did smoky eye first." As you adjust your belt and sling a satchel over your shoulder, you realize you look remarkably similar to almost everyone else in the village. Fashion here isn't about standing out, but blending into the steady rhythm of the community. That being said, you can still imagine wealthier neighbors swanning by in pleated linen gowns, gold jewelry glittering, and perfumed cones of wax melting slowly atop their heads, releasing fragrance as they walked. Try not to stare. It's hard to look glamorous when you still got crumbs of gritty bread in your teeth. One last check. Amulet in place, eyeliner sharp, tunic only slightly itchy. You're ready. The sun has risen higher, the hum of insects fills the air, and farmers are already calling to one another across the fields. With breakfast settled and your outfit secured, it's time to head out and join the endless work waiting beneath the blazing Egyptian sky.
By the time you peel yourself away from the heat of the fields, your skin feels tight from the sun, and you're grateful for the sudden coolness that comes when you step under the massive stone shadows of a temple. The shift is instant. Outside, brightness and sweat. Inside, gloom and a hush so heavy you almost feel guilty for breathing too loudly. The temple smells of resin and smoke. Incense burns in shallow bowls, tendrils of fragrant haze curling upward and clinging to the painted walls. The air is thick, perfumed, and a little dizzying after hours of dust and grain. You cough lightly, earning a glare from a priest who clearly thinks your lungs should be more respectful. Mainstream fact: Egyptian temples weren't simply places of prayer for everyone. They were the domain of priests, administrators, and the gods themselves. Ordinary villagers rarely entered the sacred inner rooms. They lingered in outer courts, bringing offerings of food, beer, or flowers. The idea of personal worship wasn't really the point here. This was about cosmic order, the balance of Ma'at, and making sure the sun didn't forget to rise tomorrow. Your sandals tap against smooth flagstones, and you crane your neck upward.
Columns painted in bright colors soar into shadow, carved with lotus blossoms and papyrus stalks. Imagine a forest of stone frozen mid-bloom. The paint is still vivid in places, though chipped and dulled by time. Historians still argue whether temples were repainted regularly in brilliant shades, or whether the faded colors we see now better reflect how villagers experienced them in everyday life. Priests glide past in spotless linen, shaved heads gleaming, carrying trays of bread and jars of beer to set before statues of gods. You catch a glimpse of a gilded figure, perhaps Amun or Ra or Hathor, half hidden in flickering lamplight. To the worshippers, these statues weren't symbols. They were living embodiments of the gods, housed and fed like royal guests. You wonder, only half joking, if the gods got tired of beer and bread 3 times a day. Here's a quirky tidbit. Temple rituals could involve waking up the god each morning, with priests carefully washing, dressing, and even applying makeup to the statue. Imagine starting your day by putting eyeliner on a giant falcon-headed deity. It sounds absurd, but to the Egyptians, it was as serious as feeding your family. It kept the world turning. The chanting begins, low and rhythmic, echoing through the stone halls. Drums beat softly, a deep pulse you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. The words are in ancient hymns, praising the gods, promising devotion. You don't catch the details, but you don't need to. The cadence itself is lulling. Combined with the thick incense and cool shadows, you could almost fall asleep standing there. A draft of cooler air slides through the temple doorway, carrying faint street sounds back inside, the bray of a donkey, the squabble of children. It feels strange to remember the noisy, messy village life just outside, while standing here among solemn chants and glowing statues. 2 worlds side by side, one dust, sweat, and onions, the other smoke, silence, and shimmering gods. You linger a while longer, watching the dance of light and shadow on painted stone. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm of the chants. But eventually, you step back out into the blazing sun, eyes watering at the sudden glare. The Nile gleams once more in the distance, and a barge is gliding lazily along the water, reed bundles stacked high on its deck. The temple's shadows fade behind you, but their coolness clings like a faint perfume, a reminder of gods who must be constantly appeased so ordinary mortals like you can keep trudging through another day.
The sun blazes overhead, and stepping back into its glare feels like walking into an oven. You squint toward the Nile, where barges drift slowly downstream, sails puffing with the faint breeze. The river is no longer just scenery, it's the highway of Egypt, carrying grain, stone, people, and gossip from village to village. You head closer, drawn to the steady creak of wood against current. The first thing you notice is the boats themselves. Made of planks lashed together, sealed with pitch and stuffed with reeds, they look fragile, almost flimsy, but they float with surprising confidence. The sails are square, made of linen that catches the sun until it glows like parchment. Crewmen pull ropes, their muscles taut, while others steer with long oars. The Nile is so calm compared to an ocean that most boats don't need to be massive, yet somehow these vessels carried blocks of stone for temples and pyramids. Mainstream fact, even the colossal obelisks weighing hundreds of tons were floated downriver on specially designed barges. Picture that. Your morning commute includes a skyscraper lying sideways. You step onto a smaller merchant barge and find yourself surrounded by bundles of reeds, jars of fish sealed with mud, and baskets of figs so ripe their sweet smell overwhelms the air. A trader grins, offering you a taste of dried dates, sticky and chewy, while another boasts about her basket of onions as if it were treasure. Commerce here is loud but oddly friendly, full of exaggerated claims and cheerful bartering. One quirky tidbit: Egyptians sometimes transported live birds in wicker cages stacked high on boats, their squawking echoing across the water. You can imagine the chaos, hundreds of honking geese crammed together, flapping wings while sailors shout over the noise. Historians still argue whether these river convoys were carefully scheduled under state control, or more like a free-for-all where private traders just shouted until someone listened. Either way, you're grateful you only have to ride along, not manage the inventory. The river air is different from the fields, cooler, carrying hints of water lilies and damp reeds. You lean against the rail, feeling the gentle sway as the boat cuts through the current. Fish leap occasionally, flashing silver, and a fisherman casts a net with a practice flick. His children splash nearby, laughing as they try to scoop up minnows with their hands. You almost forget the heat beating down, soothed by the rocking rhythm of the boat. On the opposite bank, you spot another barge passing, this one painted with bright red stripes. Its deck is crowded with pottery jars, and a group of musicians strum lyres and beat hand drums. Music on the Nile. It's part entertainment, part advertisement. Why not lure customers with a catchy tune? You half expect one of them to break into an ancient jingle for onions, but mercifully they don't. The boat glides past fields dotted with workers, then by clusters of papyrus reeds so thick they form floating islands. Birds nest among them, storks lifting off with heavy flaps of their wings. The river is alive, a constant hum of movement and sound, so different from the still sanctity of the temple. This is Egypt's bloodstream, carrying everything that sustains daily life. As you drift, your mind wanders to the bigger picture. The Nile doesn't just connect villages, it binds the whole kingdom. Pharaohs relied on this watery road to project power, to collect taxes, to feed armies. Without the river, there is no Egypt, only scattered desert settlements lost to the sands. You run your fingers along the warm wood of the boat, aware that every plank, every rope, every oar is part of a system that has lasted thousands of years. The boat pulls into a small dock, and you step on sun-bleached planks, ears ringing slightly from the shift in sound. Behind you, the crew calls out as they unload goods: fish for figs, reeds for pottery, onions for dates. The bartering begins again, loud and spirited, echoing across the water. You smile, realizing the Nile isn't just a river, it's a floating marketplace, a stage, a lifeline. And for the moment, you're part of its endless current.
You step into the rising heat, linen rustling as your sandals, if you're lucky enough to own them, scuff the packed earth. The path winds past low mud brick homes, each with clay jars stacked outside, and then opens onto the wide, dazzling spread of farmland. The Nile's gift lies before you, flat and fertile, a green carpet stitched with channels of irrigation water. This is where most Egyptians spend their waking hours, bent, sunburnt, and patient, coaxing crops from the soil. A farmer waves you over, gesturing toward a pair of oxen tethered to a wooden plow. The animals grunt and shuffle, their hooves sinking into damp ground as the blade cuts a shallow trench. It's not glamorous, but it works. And it's one of those mainstream facts. Egyptian agriculture was so efficient that it produced enough surplus grain to feed laborers, priests, and even entire armies. Without these endless hours in the fields, there would be no pyramids, no temples, no golden treasures. Just a lot of very hungry people staring at an empty horizon. The sun climbs quickly, harsh and unrelenting, reflecting off the wet soil until it feels like you're standing inside a baking oven. Sweat trickles down your temple, and you think longingly of shade. Workers sing as they labor, a rhythmic chant meant to synchronize movements. Their voices rise and fall like the river itself, steady and hypnotic. You try humming along, but you're offbeat. Your contribution earns you a few amused side eyes. Children dart between rows, chasing after frogs startled from their hiding spots. One boy shows you a small net woven from reeds, proudly declaring he'll catch fish for supper. You nod, though secretly you're wondering if you'd rather stick to bread. Frogs, fish, grain, it's all tied to the river, and the rhythm of flood and harvest keeps everyone's lives locked in its tide. And here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptian farmers sometimes trained baboons to help harvest figs. Yes, baboons. Imagine trying to manage a troop of furry coworkers who are just as likely to eat the produce as they are to hand it over.
Whether this was a widespread practice or just a weird anecdote recorded once, historians still argue. But now you can't shake the image of monkeys running a fig farm with questionable efficiency. Back in the field, the plow moves slowly, carving its furrows as men toss seed into the damp earth. Women follow, pressing the grain lightly into place with their toes, rhythmic and careful. Everyone works together because the Nile's generosity has to be seized quickly. Miss the window and you risk losing a year's food supply. A gust of hot wind blows sand across the fields, stinging your eyes. You blink furiously, eyeliner smudging, and realize just how unforgiving this environment is. Without constant irrigation and endless human labor, the desert would reclaim these green strips in a heartbeat. That's why fields are lined with dikes and channels, all maintained by hand. A farmer crouches by one now, scraping mud into place to direct the trickle of water where it's most needed. You squat beside him, trying to help, though your efforts only result in a small mudslide. He laughs kindly, shakes his head, and shoos you back before you ruin the whole system. Overhead, a flock of geese honks noisily, circling before landing near the riverbank. Egyptians domesticated geese long before chickens became common here. Geese eggs and meat are valuable, though a bit gamey, and you realize that catching one would probably be a sport all its own. For now, the honking chorus becomes background music to the endless rustle of grain stalks in the wind. You glance at the horizon, shimmering in the distance, and think about how precarious this life must have been. 1 year of poor flooding could mean famine. Yet Egyptians managed for millennia, developing calendars, storage systems, and state granaries. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly trusted the pharaoh to intercede with the gods for good floods, or if most people simply relied on their own stubborn luck. Either way, you keep your head down, push through the heat, and pretend you're used to it. Your back aches just from watching. You rub your shoulders, realizing you haven't even done the hard work yet. But that's the point. Daily labor here isn't glamorous or epic. It's repetitive, sweaty, and necessary. And yet there's a strange calm in it, a rhythm that lulls your thoughts, like the soft buzz of insects or the low chant of workers in the sun. The day stretches long, the Nile gleams, and you feel both exhausted and strangely soothed. Farming here is less about glory and more about survival. But it's survival that builds everything else: temples, palaces, even the history we're quietly wandering through right now.
Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the worn-out shoes of a 17th century postman. Imagine the faint ringing of a church bell in some foggy little town, still half asleep. The sun hasn't even tried to peek over the rooftops yet, and here you are, tugging on boots that are already damp from yesterday's mud. The whole village is silent, except for a rooster that clearly didn't get the memo about subtle wake-up calls. Your job? To deliver scraps of paper and folded parchment that could contain love, money, or just someone complaining about hay prices. It sounds noble until you realize most of your life is damp socks, heavy bags, and long miles. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week of it, unless you've got a secret passion for blisters. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love knowing who's winding down on the other side of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning bell rings and you shoulder your post bag. It's heavier than you'd prefer, but lighter than yesterday, and you already know which villages will get your grumpier side today. The post station where you collect your bag is no palace, more like a drafty stable converted into an office. There's always the faint smell of hay and horse sweat, mixed with wax from the seals on letters. You pick through the pile, some sheets of parchment for a nearby monastery, a long scroll bound with string for a tax collector, and a couple of personal notes sealed with sloppy blobs of red wax. You don't peek, of course, you're an honest postman, but you do imagine. Everyone imagines. Historians still argue whether early 17th century postal workers were allowed to carry private letters or only official ones. Some suggest that in many towns, the so-called Royal Mail ignored ordinary people,
leaving private couriers like you to bridge the gap. Others argue that the division was fuzzy and villagers slipped coins into your hand to sneak letters into your bag alongside official dispatches. Either way, your bag feels like a strange blend of empire and gossip. You tighten the leather strap across your chest. The buckle squeaks. The strap is cracked. You tell yourself it'll last another season, though you know you'll end up trying to fix it with twine before long. Outside, the air is crisp. A mist clings to the fields, turning fence posts into ghostly silhouettes. Somewhere in the distance, a cow moos, sounding as tired as you feel. A mainstream fact here. In 17th century Europe, bells really did mark time, since most villagers lacked clocks. You lived your life by tolling metal, whether you liked it or not. The bell doesn't ask if you're ready, it just tells you the road won't wait. As you adjust your bag, you glance at the letters again. The handwriting fascinates you. Some elegant loops of ink, some frantic scratches like the writer was in a hurry, or drunk, possibly both. There's always one letter with smudged ink, like the sender sneezed halfway through. You wonder if their loved one will laugh or just squint in frustration. A quirky tidbit. In some towns, postal workers were rumored to be able to read letters without opening them. Not actual magic, of course, but they supposedly studied the outside so carefully, handwriting, seals, even the thickness of paper, that they could guess contents. Imagine developing the Sherlock Holmes level of postal gossip just from sniffing parchment. You probably couldn't resist bragging about that skill in the tavern later. Today, you catch a faint smell of resin from one wax seal, likely frankincense, maybe shipped from far away. It's a little whiff of the world beyond your muddy roads, and it makes you grin despite your yawns. As the bell fades, you adjust your cloak, tug it tighter around your shoulders, and step outside the station's low door. The world is gray but expectant. Your boots crunch against gravel. Somewhere, a dog barks, already warning the neighborhood that you're up to something suspicious. Delivering mail, the most scandalous of crimes. You think briefly about the monks down the road. They'll want their parchment before their midday meal, otherwise they'll grumble in Latin that you can't understand but definitely feel in your bones. The manor house wants their long scroll by tomorrow, but you'll try to get it there today, partly to avoid trouble, partly to avoid storing that heavy thing in your bag overnight. And the personal notes? You know, those are the real treasure. The villagers you hand them to will squint at the seals like they're holding the crown jewels. The morning air is damp, but you breathe it in. Better than the stale hay inside. Your legs already ache, though you haven't gone far, but there's a certain peace in the ritual. Step, bag shift, creak of leather, deep breath, repeat. You glance at the horizon. It's a pale smear, no sun yet, but enough to guide you. And somewhere down that road, miles away, someone is waiting for a folded square of parchment that might change their whole day, or at least give them a reason to gossip with their neighbor. And with that thought, you begin your route, bell still echoing faintly behind you, the day stretching ahead like one long parchment scroll waiting to be unrolled.
The road greets you the way it always does, with mud. Thick, slippery mud that sucks at your boots as though the earth itself is trying to steal your footwear. You set one foot down, it squelches. You lift it up, it makes that ridiculous slurping noise you swear could wake the dead. There's no escaping it. Roads in the 17th century are more suggestion than infrastructure. You start off anyway, one cautious step at a time. Your bag bumps against your hip, its weight swinging like a pendulum. Every few paces you adjust the strap, but it never feels right. Maybe it's designed to keep you humble. Mainstream fact. In most parts of Europe during this time, roads outside the biggest cities weren't paved at all. Royal highways occasionally had gravel or stone, but the moment you left those, it was dirt. Dirt that turned to dust in summer and knee-deep muck in spring. You, as the poor postman, don't get to choose the season. You try to picture what this same road will look like in a few months. Dry, dusty, perhaps even pleasant. But that's not today. Today, the mud tries to swallow your boot with every step.
At one point, you nearly topple forward, arms flailing, bag swinging dangerously close to landing in a puddle. You recover, looking around sheepishly, even though the only witnesses are crows perched on a fence. One caws, as if laughing at you. You mutter something unrepeatable under your breath and keep going. Historians still argue whether couriers like you more often walked or rode horses. Some say the government-issued routes were almost always covered by mounted riders. Others point out that in rural areas, horses were expensive luxuries and most local messengers trudged on foot. You can feel your legs voting for the second theory right now. Your cloak doesn't help much. It's damp around the edges, already splattered. Still, you pull it tighter, trying to ward off the morning chill. You pass a hedgerow where frost clings stubbornly to the leaves. A hare darts across the path, startled by your crunching steps. For a fleeting moment, you envy the hare's speed. Imagine being that nimble instead of dragging this load like an unwilling mule. A quirky tidbit. Some postal guides from the era recommended carrying a spare pair of shoes, not for comfort, but because muddy roads were so likely to destroy them. Travelers wrote of abandoning ruined footwear in the muck and trudging on barefoot until the next town. You glance down at your own boots and quietly pray they make it to evening. If not, well, you can always blame occupational hazard when you turn them in for repairs. You come to a small bridge, or, well, what counts as one. Really, it's just a few planks across a stream. The water below gurgles cheerfully, mocking your cautious steps. You balance, arms out like a clumsy acrobat, and make it across without incident. Victory! You smile at yourself, half proud, half aware that no one else cares. That's the life of the postman. Small triumphs over mud and wobbly planks. The road curves, leading past a field where a farmer is already at work. He raises a hand in greeting, squinting at you from underneath his hat. You wave back, but don't stop. You know if you linger, he'll corner you with half an hour of complaints about taxes or crop failures. That's not gossip you're paid to deliver. Your bag shifts again, and you feel the scroll inside digging against your ribs. You curse the tax collectors silently. Nobles never think about how heavy their words are when they're wrapped in parchment and ribbon. Every step feels like you're carrying a brick in your bag. By now, the mud has caked around your boots, making them heavier with each mile. You scrape them against a rock, shedding some of the muck, though more will cling soon enough. It's like walking with ankle weights before gyms even existed. You tell yourself at least it's good exercise, though it doesn't feel like a consolation when your toes are freezing. The village bell behind you has long faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of your own trudging. The world feels quiet, like it belongs only to you and your letters. The mist lifts slowly, revealing hedges, thatched roofs in the distance, and the faint promise of the next stop. And through it all, the slurping mud, the swinging bag, the chilly air, you keep going. Because someone, somewhere, is waiting for you to appear at their door with ink-stained parchment. Whether it's a love note, a tax demand, or just an uncle reminding them about hay prices, you're the thin, muddy line connecting them all.
The road has flattened out now. Less mud, more rutted dirt. Your boots are still damp, but at least they're not being swallowed whole anymore. The morning is brightening, the mist thinning into gentle wisps that cling stubbornly to low fields. Birds are louder here, sparrows darting between hedges, crows overhead, and the occasional goose honking as if it's auditioning for the role of roadside alarm clock. You pat the bag at your side. The letters rustle faintly, almost like they're whispering their secrets to one another. And here's the thing, you can't help but wonder. Each folded square, each parchment scroll sealed with wax is a locked door you'll never open. You're the courier, not the reader. But the curiosity still hums. Mainstream fact, by the 17th century, letters were folded into their own envelopes, self-sealing, with wax and string, rather than slipped into the paper envelopes we think of today. Privacy was, in theory, absolute. Of course, privacy is also a suggestion, and you can't help noticing how tempting those wax seals look.
One particularly fancy letter juts against your ribs. Its seal is pressed with some kind of crest, probably belonging to a minor noble who insists on adding 3 extra flourishes just to remind you he's important. Another is less tidy, wax dribbled down the fold in a lopsided blob. You smile. Someone clearly struggled with their candle. Maybe they were in a hurry, or maybe they were just bad at it. Historians still argue whether peasants commonly wrote their own letters or relied on scribes. Literacy rates were uneven, and in some places, only priests or notaries could reliably scratch out correspondence. So when you see a clumsy blob of wax, you imagine some frustrated farmer squinting over his inkpot, muttering about how much trouble it is to write 2 pigs for sale. You shake the bag gently, listening to the muffled rustle. Each letter has its own weight, its own voice. You picture them not as paper, but as personalities traveling with you. The elegant scroll, that's the nobleman in the corner, demanding the best seat. The smudged one, that's the shy neighbor who always mumbles at the tavern. And the one that smells faintly of resin, that's the mysterious traveler leaning back with secrets they won't share. Quirky tidbit, some letters of this era were actually perfumed, dipped or dabbed with scented oils so that the aroma would linger even after long journeys. Imagine delivering a note that smells like lavender to someone who hasn't bathed in a week. You'd be doing them a favor just by handing it over. You sniff at the bag, half wishing one of yours carried such a pleasant distraction, but no luck today. Just parchment and faint wax smoke. As you trudge, your imagination runs wild. What if this letter with the sloppy wax seal is a love note? What if someone's heart is dangling in your bag, waiting to be dropped on a doorstep? You picture the scene, a blushing girl opening the fold, scanning the ink, smiling shyly at words written by candlelight. Or maybe she frowns, confused by the clumsy handwriting. Either way, you carried the moment in your muddy satchel. You chuckle. You know better than to get romantic. It's more likely a merchant nagging about late payment. Still, your brain insists on daydreaming. That's part of what keeps the miles moving. The morning air sharpens as the road narrows between hedgerows. A dog barks somewhere ahead, and you tense instinctively. Dogs are part of the job description no one told you about. You give your bag a reassuring pat, as though the letters themselves could ward off canine teeth. Back to your musings. You've heard rumors that some postmen, less honest ones, did, in fact, steam open seals, peek inside, and reseal them carefully. Was it curiosity? Spying? Maybe both. Historians still argue whether this was tolerated by officials or harshly punished when discovered. You, at least, stick to your daydreams. Letters feel safer that way. Better to imagine secrets than risk being caught with melted wax on your hands. The road rises slightly, giving you a view of fields stretching outward. Thin smoke curls from a distant chimney, promising warmth you won't feel for hours yet. You roll your shoulders and adjust the strap again, imagining the letters shifting, settling into their places. It almost feels like they sigh with you. Another mile slips by. You pass a low stone wall, mossy and uneven. You pause, leaning against it, catching your breath. Your bag is lighter than yesterday's load, but somehow your shoulders still ache. As you rest, you tap the edge of the bag gently, like drumming on a locked treasure chest. "What are you hiding in there?" you murmur. A crow nearby answers with a caw. You smile. "Thanks for the input." When you stand again, the bag feels a little friendlier, like it's sharing the walk instead of dragging you down. Letters, after all, are more than ink and paper. They're voices, stitched together across distance. And for a brief, silly moment, you feel like the world's quietest party host, carrying all those conversations to their waiting ears.
Your stomach growls. Of course it does. You've barely been on the road a couple of hours, and already the dream of bread and cheese is tugging at your mind like a particularly persuasive donkey. You pat your bag, letters on one side, food bundle on the other. One is noble duty, the other is survival. Guess which one you're more excited about. You find a spot by the side of the road,
A low stone fence where the moss cushions your back if you lean just right. The air is brisk, but at least the sun is beginning to show itself, shyly edging over the horizon. You rummage through your satchel's side pocket and pull out a hunk of bread, yesterday's cheese, and a small flask that may or may not contain more water than ale. Don't judge, you're a postman in the 17th century. Hydration rules are different here. Mainstream fact, bread and cheese were indeed the staple diet of ordinary travelers in this period. Not fancy cheese, nothing that would make a Parisian swoon, just hard, salty stuff that survived a few days without turning into a science experiment. You gnaw at yours, breaking off bits with your teeth. It squeaks between your molars, a sure sign of both its freshness and its stubbornness. A quirky tidbit, ale in the 17th century was often safer to drink than water. Wells could be contaminated, rivers were shared with livestock, and let's just say clean drinking water wasn't exactly a catchphrase yet. Ale, mildly alcoholic and boiled in brewing, killed off most of what wanted to kill you, which explains why your hydration flask leaves you pleasantly warm after a swig. You chew slowly, letting the rhythm of eating distract you from the rhythm of walking. The bread is dry, crumbling a little, but dipped in ale, it softens into something almost comforting. You lean your head back against the stone and close your eyes for a moment, savoring. The sounds of the countryside surround you, birds squabbling overhead, a distant cow complaining, the shuffle of leaves in a breeze. Historians still argue whether postmen on rural routes received official rations from stations or were left to fend for themselves. Some records suggest inns along the way were paid to provide meals, but in practice, many travelers brought their own provisions to avoid expense or disappointment. Judging by the firmness of this cheese, you're definitely in the fend-for-yourself camp today. As you munch, your mind wanders. You picture nobles at their banquets, roasted meats, delicate pastries, sweet wines, while you sit here trying to gnaw through a crust that could double as a defensive shield. Still, there's something satisfying about it. You joke to yourself that this is farm-to-table dining, centuries before trendy cafes would charge extra for the concept. A dog barks in the distance again, sharper this time. You glance up, wary. Nothing appears, so you go back to your bread. Your joke quota for the morning is filled when you realize that the cheese smells faintly like your boots. You grimace, but keep eating. Hunger is a persuasive editor. By the time you finish, crumbs cling to your cloak, and the last sip of ale lingers warmly in your chest. You feel both heavier and lighter. Heavier in the belly, lighter in the spirit. For a moment, you even forget about the blisters forming in your boots. You brush off your hands, carefully tuck the flask away, and check the bag of letters. Still secure, still pressing against your ribs like impatient passengers waiting for their stop. You sigh good-naturedly and push yourself back onto the road. The next stretch is quieter. The world feels almost suspended. No farmers yet in the fields, no wagons rattling past, just you and the slow crunch of your boots. The ale has softened your mood, and you catch yourself humming under your breath. Not a song anyone else would recognize, just a tuneless rhythm to keep your steps steady. You imagine how your day will look in 100 years. Will someone laugh at how quaint it seems to carry paper across mud for hours on end? Or will they envy the slowness, the quiet, the absence of ringing devices demanding attention every 5 minutes? Historians still argue whether postmen on rural routes received official rations from stations or were left to fend for themselves. You know firsthand that they were both harder and simpler. Harder on your feet, simpler on your mind. A gust of wind tugs at your cloak. You tighten it, tug the strap of your bag into place, and start walking again. The taste of bread lingers faintly, mixed with the tang of ale. It's not luxurious, but it's enough to fuel another mile, maybe two. And so you move on, a little heavier in the belly, a little lighter in the spirit. Still the quiet thread weaving villages together, one folded letter at a time.
The rain eases, replaced by the quiet chatter of the road itself, boots squelching, bag creaking, and the occasional bird startled from the hedgerows. You're in the long middle stretch of your route now, where boredom and curiosity battle it out in your head. Fortunately, the road brings company. A farmer appears first, pushing a creaky wheelbarrow stacked with kindling. His hat sags low over his eyes, and he lifts it briefly to nod at you. You nod back, polite, careful not to slow down too much. You know from experience that if you pause, he'll launch into a 30-minute debate about whether the new tax collectors are secretly allergic to honesty. You let the nod do the talking and keep walking. Not long after, a group of children trails you for a few paces. They giggle at the sight of your bag, whispering as though it holds treasure. One brave boy asks, "Is it gold?" You chuckle and shake your head. "Better," you whisper. "It's words." They blink at you, confused, then burst into laughter as if you've just told the world's worst riddle. Before long, they peel off back to their cottages, still giggling. Mainstream fact: in the 17th century, children were often fascinated by letters because so few of them could read. A folded parchment sealed with wax was as mysterious as a locked chest, and the bearer of those secrets, yes, that's you, seemed almost magical. A quirky tidbit: some towns grew so familiar with their postmen that children would follow along the route to announce their arrival, like an impromptu parade. Imagine a gaggle of kids shouting, "Letters! Letters!" while you trudge, pretending you're not flattered. You wonder if you'll earn that kind of following one day, or if you'll just keep getting mocked for muddy boots. As the road curves, a dog trots out from a yard. You freeze. It stares, head cocked, tail stiff. Then, just as you prepare for battle, it bounds over and starts sniffing your satchel. You exhale in relief. The dog clearly has a nose for parchment, or maybe the faint whiff of cheese still lingering from your earlier snack. You gently push it away, laughing under your breath. "Sorry, boy, no bones in here, just overdue tax notices." The dog sneezes, unimpressed, and wanders back to its yard. Historians still argue whether rural postmen were seen as trusted figures or treated with suspicion. In some regions, villagers greeted the courier warmly, eager for news. In others, they eyed him warily, worried about spies or gossip. Judging from the mix of giggles and barking you've received today, the truth is probably somewhere in between. The road grows lively for a moment as you meet a peddler with a cart full of pots and pans. He jingles cheerfully as he passes, nodding and muttering something about the weather. You glance back and notice the children from earlier tailing him now, fascinated by the clanging metal. You can't help but smirk. Apparently, your bag of words lost its shine to shiny cookware. Typical. As you trudge on, you realize these small encounters keep the monotony at bay. Every nod, every bark, every giggle is a reminder that you're not just trudging through mud and drizzle, you're part of the living road, woven into the daily rhythm of the countryside. You are, in a way, the moving gossip column of the 17th century. You glance down at the letters once again. They don't reveal their secrets, but you can imagine the voices waiting at the other end, the noble sniffing at muddy boots, the sweetheart clutching a folded note, the farmer sighing at overdue debts. And scattered along the way are the children, dogs, and curious strangers who make your day feel less like a lonely march and more like a wandering play. The sun peeks briefly from the clouds, casting a shimmer on puddles and glints on your damp cloak. You grin, just a little. For now, you're less a soggy scarecrow and more a reluctant hero, carrying not swords or gold, but words that will ripple out in laughter, arguments, sighs, and maybe even a kiss or two.
The road decides it has had enough of being polite. The sun creeps higher,
but instead of warming you, it just makes the clouds of your breath look slightly ridiculous. Then the drizzle begins. Not a dramatic storm, not the cinematic kind of rain that lets you yell, "Curse the heavens!" Just a steady mist that seeps into everything. Your cloak absorbs it like a sponge. The shoulders go first, then the seams, and soon you feel each drop sliding down toward your elbows. You tug the hood tighter, but it only shifts the discomfort. The bag on your side seems to grow heavier, as if the letters themselves are sulking about the weather. The wax seals hold, thank goodness, but you picture their edges softening with every damp gust. The last thing you want is to deliver someone's heartfelt letters smelling like mildew. Mainstream fact: early mail routes in Europe didn't stop for weather. Rain, wind, even snowstorms, couriers were expected to push through. The motto of reliability wasn't carved into postal services yet, but the expectation was already there. If people had trusted you with their words, you delivered, soggy boots or not.